You know that moment when you open your phone for a second and somehow, an hour passes without you really noticing where it went. You scroll, you tap, you switch between apps, not urgently, not even with a clear purpose, just moving through it. And at some point you pause. Not because something pulled you out of it, but because something inside you did. A quiet awareness that you've been here for a while. Not fully present, but not fully disconnected either. Just somewhere in between. There's a certain kind of person who recognizes that feeling more often than others. Not because they lack discipline, not because they don't have other things to do, but because something about being in that space feels easier to stay in than stepping out of it. And most people don't really understand that. They look at it from the outside and reduce it to something simple, a bad habit, a lack of focus, a distraction that needs to be fixed. But that explanation doesn't quite reach the full picture. Because it's not just about time. It's about what that space does for you. People who spend a lot of time online are often described in surface-level ways, but there's more going on here than people realize. What looks like constant scrolling is often something deeper. From a psychological and neurological perspective, the environments we return to most often tend to serve a specific function, not always consciously, but consistently. The brain is always trying to regulate something. Stimulation, emotion, uncertainty. And digital spaces are uniquely designed to meet those needs in a very specific way. They're predictable. Not in content but in structure. You know what happens when you open an app. You know how to navigate it, you know what kind of interaction to expect, even if you don't know exactly what you'll see. That predictability matters more than it seems. Because in contrast, the offline world can feel less controlled. More ambiguous. More demanding in ways that aren't always visible. There's research in neuroscience that points to how the brain responds to variable rewards and constant input. When you scroll, you're not just consuming content. You're engaging in a pattern that keeps your attention active, your mind slightly stimulated, your focus gently occupied. It's not overwhelming. But it's not empty either. It sits in that middle space where your mind doesn't have to work too hard, but also doesn't have to slow down completely. And for some people, that balance feels right. Especially if their internal state tends to lean toward overthinking, restlessness, or emotional intensity. In those cases, being online doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like regulation. A way to stay engaged without being overwhelmed. A way to keep your mind moving without having to confront everything all at once. But this pattern doesn't just come from how the brain works in general, it's also shaped by experience. If you grew up in environments where things felt inconsistent, where your attention was often pulled in different directions, where you had to find your own ways to stay occupied or distracted, your system learns something early. It learns how to manage its own state. And when digital environments become available, they offer a tool that fits that need almost perfectly. You can enter and exit at any time. You can choose what you engage with. You can control the level of interaction. And most importantly, you can avoid the parts of reality that feel heavier, slower, or harder to process. Not in a dramatic way. Just gradually. So over time, your brain starts to associate that space with a kind of stability. Not because it solves anything, but because it smooths things out. And when something consistently makes your internal state feel more manageable, it stops feeling optional. It starts feeling necessary. That's usually the part people miss. They assume the behavior is the problem. But often, it's the solution your system found. It's important to say this clearly. There's nothing inherently better about being less connected to digital spaces, and there's nothing inherently wrong with spending time in them. Different people regulate themselves in different ways. Some people find balance through movement, conversation, or external activity. Others find it through controlled environments where they can manage input more precisely. Neither is more correct. They're just different ways of maintaining stability. But when your system leans toward that digital space, it can create a kind of quiet dependence. Not in an obvious way. Just a consistent return. A habit that forms not out of compulsion but familiarity. And that's where it becomes more complex. Because even if that space helps regulate you, it also comes with a trade-off. The more time you spend in environments that are structured, predictable, and curated, the more the unstructured parts of life can feel difficult to engage with. Real-world moments don't have the same packing. They don't offer the same level of control. They require a different kind of attention. And when your mind is used to the rhythm of digital input, everything else can feel slightly slower, slightly heavier, slightly harder to stay with. So the cycle continues. Not because you're choosing to disconnect from reality, but because your system has learned where it feels easiest to exist. There's also something else happening underneath this. When you spend a lot of time online, you're not just consuming content, you're observing people, ideas, perspectives, emotions. At a distance, without being directly involved. And that creates a kind of awareness. You see patterns, you notice behavior, you understand dynamics without necessarily having to participate in them. That can feel safer, more manageable. But it also means that your connection to things can become more observational than experiential. You're there, but not fully in it. And over time, that can create a subtle sense of detachment. Not because you don't care, but because you've learned how to engage without fully stepping in. And that's the paradox. The same space that helps you regulate your mind can also make it harder to fully feel present outside of it. The same environment that keeps you connected to everything can create a sense of distance from what's directly in front of you. And that doesn't mean something is wrong. It means your system found something that works in a specific way. It learned how to manage stimulation, how to control input, how to stay in a state that feels manageable. And that has value. It means you can adapt quickly to information. It means you can navigate complex streams of input without being overwhelmed. It means you've developed a kind of awareness that comes from observing more than reacting. But it also means there are parts of your experience that may feel different when you step outside of that space. And that's something worth noticing. Not to change it. Not to fix it. Just to understand it. Because when you understand why you return to certain environments, it changes how you see the behavior. It stops feeling like something random and starts feeling like something that follows a pattern. A pattern your system learned for a reason. And when you see that clearly, something shifts. You stop judging yourself for it. You stop comparing your habits to people who regulate themselves differently. You start recognizing that your mind is trying to maintain a certain kind of balance. And that doesn't make you disconnected. It makes you adaptive. So if this feels familiar, it's not because there's something missing. It's because there's something specific about how you process the world and how you've learned to stay steady within it. And if you pay attention to that, there are probably other patterns connected to it. They're subtle, easy to overlook. But once you start noticing them, they tend to follow the same quiet logic. And over time, they begin to make more sense.